हेलो एवरीवन, वेलकम बैक टू माय चैनल। तो आज के वीडियो में हम देखने वाले हैं एनसीईआरटी क्लास 8 पॉलिटी, जिसमें आज हम देखेंगे चैप्टर 10 जो कि है लॉ एंड सोशल जस्टिस। तो शुरू करते हैं हमारा आज का चैप्टर। डू यू रिकॉल द स्टोरी ऑफ एसर्ट फ्रॉम योर क्लास 7 बुक? We saw there that a chain of markets links the producer of cotton to the buyer of the sart in the supermarket. Buying and selling was taking place at every step in the chain. Many of the people directly or indirectly involved in the production of the sart. The small farmer producing cotton, the weavers of a road, or the workers in the garment exporting factory faced exploitation or an unfair situation in the market. Markets everywhere tend to be exploitative of people, whether as workers, consumers, or producers. To protect people from such exploitation, the government makes certain laws. These laws try to ensure that the unfair practices are kept at a minimum in the markets. Let us take a common market situation where the law is very important. This is the issue of workers' wages. Private companies, contractors, business persons normally want to make as much profit as they can. In the drive for profits, they might deny workers their rights and not pay them wages. For example, in the eyes of the law, it is illegal or wrong to deny workers their wages. Similarly, to ensure that the workers are not underpaid or are paid fairly, there is a law on minimum wages. A worker has to be paid not less than the minimum wage by the employer. The minimum wages are revised upwards every few years. As with the law on minimum wages, which is meant to protect workers, there are also laws that protect the interests of producers and consumers in the market. These help ensure that the relations between these three parties, the worker, consumer, and producer, are governed in a manner that is not exploitative. Table 1 provides some important laws relating to the protection of these various interests. Columns 2 and 3 in Table 1 state why for whom these laws are necessary. Based on discussion in the classroom, you have to complete the remaining entries in the table. तो ये है टेबल। But merely making laws is not enough. The government has to ensure that these laws are implemented. This means that the law must be enforced. Enforcement becomes even more important when the law seeks to protect the weak from the strong. For instance, to ensure that every worker gets fair wages, the government has to regularly inspect work sites and punish those who violate the law. When workers are poor or powerless, the fear of losing future earnings or facing reprisals often forces them to accept low wages. Employers know this well and use their power to pay workers less than the fair wage. In such cases, it is crucial that laws are enforced. Through enforcing and upholding these laws, the government can control the activities of individuals or private companies so as to ensure social justice. Many of these laws have their basis in the fundamental rights guaranteed by the Indian Constitution. For instance, the right against exploitation says that no one can be forced to work for low wages or under bondage. Similarly, the Constitution lays down no child below the age of 14 years shall be employed to work in any factory or mines or engaged in any other hazardous employment. How are these laws played out in practice? To what extent do they address the concerns of social justice? These are some of the questions that this chapter will now go on to explore. Bhopal gas tragedy. The world's most industrial tragedy took place in Bhopal 24 years ago. Union Carbide, an American company, had a factory in the city in which it produced pesticides. At midnight on 2 December 1984, methyl isocyanide, a highly poisonous gas, started leaking from this UC plant. Remembers Aziza Sultan, a survivor, At about 12:30 a.m., I woke to the sound of my baby coughing badly. In the half light, I saw that the room was filled with a white cloud. I heard people shouting, "Run, run!" Then I started coughing, with each breath seeming as if I was breathing in fire. My eyes were burning the next morning. Within 3 days, more than 8,000 people were dead. Hundreds of thousands were maimed. Mass cremations. Most of those exposed to the poison gas came from poor working class families, of which nearly 50,000 people are today too sick to work. Among those who survived, many developed severe respiratory disorders, eye problems, and other disorders. Children developed peculiar abnormalities, like the girl in the photo, a child severely affected by the gas. The disaster was not an accident. UC had deliberately ignored the essential safety measures in order to cut costs. Much before the Bhopal disaster, there had been incidents of gas leak killing a worker and injuring several. Members of UC Employees Union protesting. Despite the overwhelming evidence pointing to UC as responsible for the disaster, it refused to accept responsibility. In the ensuing legal battle, the government represented the victims in a civil case against UC. It filed a $3 billion compensation case in 1985, but accepted a lowly $470 million in 1989. Survivors appealed against the settlement, but the Supreme Court ruled that the settlement amount would stand. Gas victims with the gas relief minister. UC stopped its operations but left behind tons of toxic chemicals. These have seeped into the ground, contaminating water. Dow Chemical, the company who now owns the plant, refuses to take responsibility for cleanup. Bags of chemicals lie strewn around the UC plant. 24 years later, people are still fighting for justice, for safe drinking water, for healthcare facilities, and jobs for the people poisoned by UC. They also demand that Anderson, the UC chairman who faces criminal charges, be prosecuted. The struggle for justice goes on. What is a worker's vote? If we are to understand the events leading to Bhopal disaster, we have to ask, why did Union Carbide set up its plant in India? One reason why foreign companies come to India is for cheap labor. Wages that the companies pay to workers, say in the USA, are far higher than what they have to pay to workers in poorer countries like India. For lower pay, companies can get longer hours of work. Additional expenses such as housing facilities for workers are also fewer. Thus, companies can save costs and earn higher profits. Cost cutting can also be done by other more dangerous means. Lower working conditions, including lower safety measures, are used as ways of cutting costs. In the UC plant, every safety device was malfunctioning or was in short supply. Between 1980 and 1984, the work crew for the MIC plant was cut in half from 12 to 6 workers. The period of safety training for workers was brought down from 6 months to 15 days. The post of night shift worker for MIC plant was abolished. Read the following comparison between UC safety system in Bhopal and its other plant in the USA. At West Virginia, USA, computerized warning and monitoring systems were in place, whereas the UC plant in Bhopal relied on manual causes and the human senses to detect gas leaks. At the West Virginia plant, emergency evacuation plans were in place, but non-existent in Bhopal. Why are there such sharp differences in safety standards across countries? And even after the disaster happened, why was the compensation to the victims so low? One part of the answer lies in what is perceived as the worth of an Indian worker. One worker can easily replace another since there is so much unemployment. There are many workers who are willing to work in unsafe conditions in return for a wage. Making use of the workers' vulnerability, employers ignore safety in workplaces. Thus, even so many years after the Bhopal gas tragedy, there are regular reports of accidents in construction sites, mines, or factories due to the careless attitude of the employers. Enforcement of safety law. As the lawmaker and enforcer, the government is supposed to ensure that safety laws are implemented. It is also the duty of the government to ensure that the right to life guaranteed under Article 21 of the Constitution is not violated. What was the government doing when there were such blatant violations of safety standards in the UC plant? First, the safety laws were lax in India. Second, even these weak safety laws were not enforced. Government officials refused to recognize the plant as hazardous and allowed it to come up in a populated locality. When some municipal officials in Bhopal objected that the installation of an MIC production unit in 1978 was a safety violation, the position of the government was that the state needs the continued investment of the Bhopal plant, which provides jobs. It was unthinkable, according to them, to ask UC to shift to cleaner technology or safer procedures. Government inspectors continued to approve the procedures in the plant, even when repeated incidents of leaks from the plant made it obvious to everybody that things were seriously wrong. This, as you know, is contrary to what the role of a lawmaking and enforcement agency should be. Instead of protecting the interests of people, their safety was being disregarded both by the government and by private companies. This is obviously not at all desirable. With more industries being set up both by local and foreign businesses in India, there is a great need for stronger laws protecting workers' rights and better enforcement of these laws. New laws to protect the environment. In 1984, there were very few laws protecting the environment in India, and there was hardly any enforcement of these laws. The environment was treated as a free entity, and any industry could pollute the air and water without any restriction. Whether it was our rivers, air, groundwater, the environment was being polluted and the health of people disregarded. Thus, not only was UC a beneficiary of lower safety standards, it did not have to spend any money to clean up the pollution. In the USA, this is necessary part of the production process. The Bhopal disaster brought the issue of the environment to the forefront. Several thousands of persons who were not associated with the factory in any way were greatly affected because of the poisonous gases leaked from the plant. This made people realize that the existing laws, though vague, only cover the individual worker and not persons who might be injured due to industrial accidents. In response to this pressure from environmental activists, and others in the years following the Bhopal gas tragedy, the Indian government introduced new laws on the environment. Henceforth, the polluter was to be held accountable for the damage done to environment. The environment is something that people of our generations will share, and it could not be destroyed merely for industrial development. The courts also gave a number of judgments upholding the right to a healthy environment as intrinsic to the fundamental right to life. In Subhas Kumar vs. State of Bihar 1991, the Supreme Court held that the right to life is a fundamental right under Article 21 of the Constitution, and it includes the right to the enjoyment of pollution-free water and air for full enjoyment of life. The government is responsible for setting up laws and procedures that can check pollution clean rivers, and introduce heavy fines for those who pollute. Environment as a public facility. In recent years, while the courts have come out with strong orders on environmental issues, these have sometimes affected people's livelihoods adversely. For instance, the courts directed industries in residential areas in Delhi to close down or shift out of the city. Several of these industries were polluting the neighborhood, and discharge from this industry was polluting the river Yamuna because they had been set up without following the rules. But while the court's action solved one problem, it created another. Because of the closure, many workers lost their jobs. Others were forced to go to faraway places where these factories had relocated. And the same problem now began to come up in these areas. For now, these places became polluted, and the issue of the safety conditions of workers remained unaddressed. Recent research on environmental issues in India has highlighted the fact that the growing concern for the environment among the middle classes is often at the expense of the poor. So, for example, slums need to be cleaned as part of a city's beautification drive, or as in the case of a polluting factory is moved to the outskirts of the city. And while this awareness of the need for a clean environment is increasing, there is a little concern for the safety of the workers themselves. The challenge is to look for solutions where everyone can benefit from a clean environment. One way this can be done is to gradually move to cleaner technologies and processes in factories. The government has to encourage and support factories to do this. It will need to find those who pollute. This will ensure that the workers' livelihoods are protected and both workers and communities living around the factories enjoy a safe environment. Conclusion. Laws are necessary in many situations, whether this be the market, office, or factory, so as to protect people from unfair practices. Private companies, contractors, business persons, in order to make higher profits, resort to unfair practices such as paying workers low wages, employing children for work, ignoring the conditions of work, ignoring the damage to the environment and hence to the people in the neighborhood, etc. A major role of the government, therefore, is to control the activities of private companies by making, enforcing, and upholding laws so as to prevent unfair practices and ensure social justice. This means that the government has to make appropriate laws and also has to enforce the laws. Laws that are weak and poorly enforced can cause serious harm, as the Bhopal gas tragedy showed. While the government has a leading role in this respect, people can exert pressure so that both private companies and the government act in the interests of the society. Environment, as we saw, is one example where people have pushed a public cause and the courts have upheld the right to healthy environment as intrinsic to the right to life. In this chapter, we have argued that people now must demand that this facility of healthy environment be extended to all. Likewise, workers' right to work, right to a fair wage, and decent work conditions is an area where the situation is still very unfair. People must demand stronger laws protecting workers' interests so that the right to life is achieved for all. तो ये है इस चैप्टर का एक्सरसाइज। और ये है इसका ग्लोसरी। तो इसी के साथ हमारा ये चैप्टर कंप्लीट हो गया है। और क्योंकि ये इस बुक का लास्ट चैप्टर था तो आज के वीडियो में हमने NCERT क्लास 8 पॉलिटी का बुक कंप्लीट कर लिया है। तो अगर आप चैनल पर नए हैं तो चैनल को सब्सक्राइब कर दीजिए और नोटिफिकेशन आइकन पर क्लिक कर दीजिए ताकि आपको सारे वीडियोस के अपडेट्स मिल सकें। और अगर आपको वीडियो अच्छा लगे तो लाइक कर दीजिए, साथ ही अपने दोस्तों के साथ शेयर कीजिए ताकि उन्हें भी हेल्प हो सके। तो हमारा आज का वीडियो यहीं तक था। थैंक यू, थैंक्स फॉर वॉचिंग।